My name is Jack Berfield, and I'm presenting today on research that I've been conducting with Dr. Chase Harless, Katie Allen, and my co-researcher Paul Ryland. The title of the research is Neighborhood Resilience, a Qualitative Exploration of Social Responses to Natural Disaster. And thank you all for being here today so early. So I'll begin by describing giving a general overview of the research. The purpose of the research was to conduct a comparative case study of two Asheville neighborhoods, Kenilworth, which is a historically resource-rich area of Asheville, and the south side, specifically Erskine Apartments and the surrounding area, which is a historically underserved area of Asheville. And the purpose was to examine community mobilization during and after Hurricane Helene. We looked at mutual aid and resource sharing strategies. Our questions centered around barriers to equitable disaster response, and also we hoped to learn lessons about how to strengthen climate resilience at a neighborhood level. The framework we used was a collective narrative lens, which is meant to center historically marginalized voices, and it has a specific focus on equity and disaster preparedness and recovery, which informed our recommendations that we're in. So why does this matter? Research shows that climate disasters are political disasters, which I'll elaborate on more later, that impact marginalized communities due to a variety of factors, including economic instability, infrastructural inequities, systemic disinvestment, and that community-led mobilization plays a critical role in disaster survival and recovery. The outcome of the research, which is ongoing, is to generate actionable recommendations which will enhance equitable, community-based disaster response planning in the future. So our methods, a little bit about the methods. We used an interpretive phenomenological analytic approach. It's a mouthful. This approach is where we invite people to extensively share their experiences of neighborhood cohesion during and after Hurricane Helene. What this looks like is we had an interview guide, we conducted interviews, and we looked deeply at individual narratives and themes within people's stories of recovery after Helene, and then looked at emergent themes between people's experiences and their narratives. We conducted 20 one-on-one interviews, 10 in Kenilworth, 10 in Southside. This was based on proximity and access. One of the principal investigators lives in the Kenilworth area, one in the Southside area. It was a community-based purposive snowball sample methodology where we interviewed people and just tried to make more connections through that process. We used a pre-screener that was used to determine eligibility. Our inclusion criteria was that you had to be 18 years or older and a resident of or working in Kenilworth or Southside neighborhood at the time of Helene. And for their time being interviewed, participants were provided $75 gift cards. So a little bit of a disclaimer right here before we move into the rest of the presentation. This research is ongoing. The representative quotes you'll hear today are drawn from a diverse plurality of people in both Kenilworth and Southside. Like I said, the data analysis is ongoing, and the theoretical framework presented here is just one of many that we are applying as we go through the process of reviewing these transcripts. So for the purposes of today's presentation, we have just one of our overarching theoretical frameworks, which we're applying to analyzing all the different interviews that we've conducted. The one I've chosen for today to present on is social infrastructure, which is a sort of a modified form of social capital theory. If you're familiar with Julian Putnam's Bowling Alone, he was one of the people who popularized that and brought it to public consciousness. Our model of social infrastructure, we use the term social infrastructure to begin moving away from capitalistic, market-based languages around how communities function and what they do and how to support them. And it's a three-tier model, beginning with the first primary tier, the bonding level, which occurs between people when they form into a functional and/or geographic community. Moving up one level in scale, bridging, which occurs between functional and/or geographic communities, and you can see the connections that happen, that bridge between individuals between these communities. And then the third tier, which is more hierarchical in nature and occurs between people and institutional power centers, such as governmental institutions and NGOs, etc. And this theoretical framework is multifaceted. So For today's presentation, we have various theoretical sub-themes that inform and influence what social infrastructure look like and how we are going to be analyzing the interviews that we have collected. We have time for 4 of these theoretical sub-themes, the first being communication infrastructure, connections outside of the neighborhood, resource distribution, grassroots versus institutional, and disaster as a catalyst for long-term change. And each of these we'll be diving into a little bit more and having representative quotes. So again, just a quick caveat. These quotes that we'll be presenting on today are representative of multiple intersecting sub-themes. They all kind of bleed into each other, as is the nature of this work. But for purposes of illustration today, we've kind of isolated them and kind of tried to highlight a specific sub-theme within each of these quotes. So the first sub-theme is communication infrastructure. And this is how information flows among people, including gathering spots in the community, lines of communication, and communication strategies, including posters, public forums, signal, group chats, etc. And the first quote that we have that's representative of this sub-theme is from a Southside resident who reported, I'll be quoting each of these quotes at length. They said, "It was okay. I got to see people that I don't normally see on a regular basis. I went to a park, I think, for a whole week straight to help out. So I got to talk to people I hadn't talked to in a while or hadn't seen in a while, or just help distribute the food or the supplies. I shouldn't say, well, the hot food and the supplies, I helped out with both of them. And then, when we weren't busy, you did have time to socialize, talk to people. I don't know if I should say this. It's on recording. I had time to network." And this is an interesting report. In context, we were asking about what it was like making these bonding connections in their community immediately after the storm. And this person is talking about their experience socializing as part of the immediate recovery process, but also having this space to also find gainful employment and work when people's incomes were so massively disrupted after the storm. The next quote we have is from a Kenilworth resident who reported, "Yeah, the church up the street is sort of a hub for the community. People were meeting up there, and I finally got that through the grapevine that they were meeting up there and sharing where the elderly were, and people were volunteering to go door to door to check on those people. It was really nice to have that security, yeah." And what this person is reporting is about lines of communication being important to ensure that elderly and less able and mobile community members are able to get their needs met and that they're not lost in the fray. So the next sub-theme we have is connections outside of the neighborhood, and this is how information, resources, and people flow in and out of the community, and you feel kind of like think about the theoretical framework. This is more of a bridging piece. The first quote we have from a Southside resident, they reported, "Again, you got to know somebody to even do the first step, to know how to start or who to go to, because they weren't all even a part of this community. Someone works for Housing Authority, and I don't know if she worked for the Housing Authority until I started helping. So I wouldn't have known how to go contact the city official if she hadn't come to the park that day. So you got to know somebody to know other people and to show up to actually be part of the community." And this person is talking about a little bit of bridging, a little bit of linking, and the importance of having community contacts as a way for people to enter into more closed communities. This is especially important in rural areas as well. The next quote we have is from a Kenilworth resident, and they report that, "And you know how Western North Carolina really stepped up. I had a gentleman from Samaritan's Purse just show up one day wanting to bring supplies to Kenilworth, and I didn't work out because they were going to have to airdrop. Or I get a call from the Lions Club saying, 'What do you need?' 5 days later, a 24-foot box truck shows up here filled to the door." And this person is talking about that aid sometimes comes from strangers and is unexpected, and that bridging and linking connections form on the fly. Next, we have resource distribution, grassroots versus institutional. And this is about how resources are collected, requested, transferred, and distributed by people in the community and or by governmental entities. The first quote we have is from a Southside resident who reports, "I don't think so. Everybody kind of scattered after supplies were gone from the park. People kind of scattered because after the food and supplies got transferred down to the center, nobody was coming to the park anymore. Because of the supplies removed from a very local spot here at the park down to the center, which isn't too far, but still out of the apartment community." And the important part here is because the supplies were moved from a local spot out of the apartment community, they're highlighting the importance of community ownership and building a sense of community agency in the recovery process, which we can see will contribute to the emergence of long-term changes or not. The next quote we have is from a Kenilworth resident. That group up there, they already had like a hierarchy of people too. You know, somebody was a spokesperson, somebody knew what was happening all the time in different streets, different areas of Kenilworth. They were already on it, and I thought that was amazing. And people were driving to, I don't know if it was Charlotte to go to Sam's Club or some Costco or something to load up and bring it back to people who were in need of special things. That was pretty awesome. They did stuff like that. That was like, wow, okay, yeah, pretty amazing. I thought, but having that already in place is a game changer, I think, for our community for sure. And they're noting the importance of having the communication networks and the physical spaces pre-established as being part of a game changer in their recovery experience, which contributed to their long-term outcomes. So disaster catalyst is the final sub-theme as a catalyst for long-term change. And it is important to note that change can either be positive or negative. Social connections and trust can either grow or rupture among individuals, between organizations, and also between individuals and governmental and NGO entities. Southside resident reports, the sense of connection went away, definitely went away. Yeah, kind of went their own way. And to go back to what you were saying about getting the people to come together, you can't get anybody to do stuff. Who will cook what? Who will bring what? You know what I'm saying? And this isn't the only perspective we heard. It was mixed, but it was definitely, we heard enough that this kind of change was not long lasting, nothing stuck from enough people that it became a theme that was important enough to highlight. And the final quote we have is from a Kenilworth resident that was a pre-Helene tension that I don't feel anymore, which is encouraging. Our collective humanity has sort of come to the fore, not our differences, that's a good thing. And they're talking about that, this was in the context of the quote, that in a weird way, the storm was the best thing that happened for us, and that this sense of unity and collective agency that was submerged before the storm kind of came to the fore and it's stuck around. So, discussion, why does this matter? Hopefully by the end of this presentation you've been able to hear how the different sub-themes kind of feed into that overarching theoretical framework of social infrastructure and how important all of these factors are to account for it. Especially important that the kind of bonding, bridging, linking model kind of parallels the social work orientation towards micro, meso, macro level interventions. Theoretical models are not a blueprint, but they are helpful to navigate ambiguous, chaotic operating contexts of disaster environments. They're also broadly applicable, and it's not just to environmental disasters. A recent personal anecdotal evidence that I can share is that a couple of friends took a trip to Minneapolis to assist and learn about neighborhood safety and community upstander strategies with people who were resisting ICE incursions in the city. And there was a lot of conversation back and forth that lessons learned from Helene were directly transferable to their operating context. And it's also important to note that disaster anthropologist Roberto Barrios, speaking about the co-constitutive relationship between resilience and vulnerability, points out that disasters, whether they're ecological, geological, biological, or financial, are all political in nature and inequitably distributed along lines of social identity, including gender, ethnicity, race, and class. So moving from observation to action, we bridge that link, that gap right there, by using our social work's ethical framework to bridge from what is to what ought to be done about it. And we have a couple of recommendations based on our findings so far. It's important to note that disaster recovery is not a one-size-fits-all process, that equitable resilience and just recovery is a community-centered and place-based practice, and that it works best when we have these strategies placed before disaster hits so that we're not scrambling in the fray. General practice recommendations based on our theoretical framework that we presented today include at the bonding level, which is to prioritize hyper-local leadership, promote emergent leadership during disasters, and to identify and create infrastructure to support leadership development beforehand. Bridging, which is to prioritize and network community centers to support the flow of resources, information, and volunteer energy. And this reduces the undue burden of establishing these networks during a disaster. And the final tier of linking, which is for social workers and anyone else who's interested, to advocate for institutional responsibility in developing strategies to effectively link with and support these bonding and bridging networks. And I would like to give my acknowledgements. I have special thanks to my brilliant co-researchers, Dr. Chase Harless in the audience, Katie Allen, who is not here, and Paul Ryland, who is also in the audience. Special thanks to the residents of Kenilworth and Southside for sharing their stories. And thank you for the research project funding provided by the Office of the Provost through the Hurricane Helene Mitigation Grant Award. And that's 15.
All right, perfect. So we've got 3